Hello and welcome. My name is Blaise. I'm CCBR's Eastern Outreach Director, and I'm coming to you live from Toronto to talk to you about discussing abortion on social media. This is something I've been thinking about for a long time and doing poorly and doing well for a long time. I started out in high school when I became convicted about the abortion issue. In grade 10 religion class, I was when we were doing ethics, I was assigned to debate the abortion issue and assigned to the pro-life position. And when I did the research, I discovered the horror of abortion and partial birth abortion procedures and what happens to preborn children in the womb through abortion. I became convicted about my pro-life beliefs. And I became active in the movement when I got to university. But in the years in between, I first started defending the pro-life position with people on online forums. And over the last 15 years, I've spent a lot of time talking about abortion and talking about lots of other issues, from technology and copyright to bioethics, lots of issues online. So I've spent a lot of time learning from experience what to do and what not to do. And I'm really passionate about technology too. I did a computer science degree at the University of Toronto. So this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart, because especially during a time like this, during the pandemic, when we are staying at home and a lot of pro-life outreach is canceled. Our truck is still on the road, but all of our projects in which we would have conversations with people are canceled. But abortion is not canceled. We've been using this time for training, for learning more about the issues to become more effective ambassadors for preborn children, but also our opportunity to have conversation with people. It's not in person so much these days, but we can still reach people through social media. So this particular training of how to have effective conversations about abortion on social media is especially relevant and especially important. Now, there are two things that I want to focus on today when talking about having effective discussions on social media. The first is people, and the second is platforms. I think we need to have the right understanding of people and the right understanding of the platforms in order to have effective conversations. All of our usual apologetics that we've covered on previous live streams in April, that's kind of the prerequisite for having effective conversations, right? You got to know the human rights argument, how to build common ground, use analogies, and ask questions, all the tools that we teach people in conversation. If you're new to apologetics, you can find CCBR's book, Stuck, or you can find on our Facebook page live streams from our Western Outreach Director talking about how to have effective conversations on abortion. But the first point is that you got to know your apologetics. You got to know your hard apologetics. It's not new. We're just putting the same apologetics into practice, but how we put it in practice is a bit different. And I think we all know that it can be a lot harder to have productive and fruitful conversations online. I'm going to bring up now on the screen here the obligatory XKCD comic from Randall Munroe. This is a comic called Internet Argument. And the subtitle on it is, "It's way easier to be a jerk to words than to people." Right? When we're separated by screens and all we have to see are the words, it's so much easier to forget the person. And the number one thing is to be extra conscious of the person, to be extra conscious of practicing empathy. because oftentimes social media platforms are working against us. We see disembodied arguments, disembodied words, and we have to remember the person behind them. I want to share a story from a conversation I had that was not about abortion, but an online conversation I had. Over the last few years, I have been playing a lot of chess online, and I usually just play short games of chess and then kind of move on to the next game or move on with my day. But there's a little message queue that I don't normally pay attention to. I logged in one day and I saw that there was a message waiting for me. And it was somebody who I guess I had beaten at a game of chess. And there's really nasty comments waiting for me, just about like anti-Semitic comments, and just comments suggesting that I should commit suicide because of how I look, and went on from there. Just dropped those in, and I just replied, trying to remember the person. I replied, I said, "Who hurt you? Like, look, I'm sorry that you lost the game, and I'm sorry if people have treated you badly in your life. I wish you well. Just like no ill will coming back. It's just a game. I don't know what's happened to you, but obviously you're hurting, and I'm sorry for that." And he replies to me, "I'm actually quite happy. I'm just saying, brother, you know, I'm just expressing my honest feelings." And I challenged him. And I said, are you like, your honest feelings? I said, are you honestly that anti-Semitic when you're happy? And he came back to me and he said, "No, I'm not at all, actually. Sorry, man. I just hate losing." He says, "Nothing personal. I just need to relax, take the loss and move on." And he tries to explain how he just gets stressed out and works up, and he apologizes. And he says, "Anyways, I'm sorry if I offended you. I was an angry, sore loser. I'll do better." I was not expecting that. That started from one of the worst kind of internet conversations you could have, where people are just being nasty and cruel in ways that they would never be in person, to an apology and a commitment to do better. And I think the way in which you overcome those obstacles to empathy is you really have to remember the person. When it's easy to forget the person and easy just to focus on the words, you really have to remember the person who you're speaking with. That there is a human person behind those words, and we're not here to win arguments. We're here to win people. And that can be harder with social media because we don't have body language. We don't have tone of voice. And conversations often happen asynchronously, which means they're not necessarily at the same time. Like, you leave a comment and somebody replies an hour later. So it can be harder to make that kind of connection. And we can more naturally lean towards attacking arguments or being snarky or being polite and logical and consistent, but just forgetting that a simple logical statement could come across really harshly to somebody without tone of voice, right? So the first big thing I would say is just about people. We have to remember the person, be extra conscious about empathy, and really focus on sensitivity over snark. Because whereas social media often has this culture of snark, that's not helpful when you're talking about something as important and as sensitive as the abortion issue. So we have to go out of our way, since we don't have the tools of body language or tone of voice, since we don't have those tools to express empathy. We have to go out of our way in our words to show empathy, to show concern, to show that we care, and to be extra conscious and to try to avoid misinterpretation, things that could come across harshly. So we'll come back to more thoughts on people. But I do want to talk more about, well, I'll give a few practical tips, but then we'll get into platforms, and then we'll kind of wrap it all up at the end and tie it all together. So given how conversations are asynchronous, they're separate, given these challenges of communication, I find for a variety of reasons, it's really helpful to take it slow and keep it short. You might see a rant from somebody and be like, I can identify all the logical fallacies there, and I know all the problems, and they need to know this stat. You know, if they only knew the biology of when life begins and that viability is not the same thing as this, and you want to write an essay. And certainly at the opening of the conversation, it's not the time to write an essay. Number one tip I would give in terms of practical things is to keep it short, keep it focused. I try whenever I can to ask one question, like focus on one question. So find some piece of common ground, find one thing that I want to respond to and one question that I can ask, at least at the start of a conversation. Because it's way easier to focus conversation that way. It's way easier to engage someone. And if you have somebody's attention and they're engaging with you and you've exchanged a few comments, then maybe you have time and space to elaborate a little bit more and to bring up 2 or 3 points while still trying to keep it short and concise. But it's just really easy to start typing essays, and that's not what's going to reach people. I think it's really helpful to keep it short, stay focused, to think, okay, what's the most important thing in this comment? The most important thing that I think I need to help this person understand. And where can I find a little bit of common ground and ask a question to get the conversation going? Where can I find a little bit of common ground and ask the next question to keep the conversation going? In a synchronous conversation in person, when you're talking to someone face to face, real time, it's easier to control the conversation and to focus it. When it starts going off in different directions, to be like, well, hold on a second, I think we need to answer this first. Like you can rein a conversation in. When you're online, it's easier for a conversation to get out of control because you say 10 things and they say 10 things and you say 10 things to their 10 things and they say 10 things to your 10 things, and suddenly you're multiplying exponentially like the coronavirus, and you're just out of control with an exponential curve. Keeping it short, keeping it focused, keeping it concise is key for effectively reaching people and for keeping conversations focused online. Okay, I want to talk a bit about platforms as well. So I'm going to bring up another tab here in a second. I'm going to borrow from a few great minds on technology here. A lot of what I say I've learned from John Dyer, who's a technologist and theology professor in the States. And I came across his blog 10 years back, and he wrote this fantastic book, From the Garden to the City, about technology and theology. But I'm going to bring up some of his slides on the screen here. He introduced me to Marshall McLuhan's thought too. Marshall McLuhan was a U of T professor, a devout Catholic, and a solid pro-lifer as well. So Marshall McLuhan and John Dyer are both close to my heart. John Dyer uploaded these slides from a presentation he gave on the philosophy of technology about 10 years back, and I'm gonna share some of these with you. He says the way that most people think about technology is, you can either think it's good, you can think it's bad, or it's neutral. It's just how you use it, right? So some people just say, well, technology is a good thing, or they say technology is a bad thing. Other people are like, no, we need to be smarter. technology is neutral. It depends on how you use it. But he says in his book, he says that in his final semester of seminary, a professor who was known both for his brilliance and shocking out-of-nowhere statements, he said something that changed everything for me, John Dyer writes. He says, in the middle of addressing a variety of current issues in society and culture, he looked straight at all of us and said, one of the most dangerous things you can believe in this world is that technology is neutral. Wait, what? I thought, surely he must have misspoken. After all, nothing could be more obvious than the fact that technology is neutral. What matters is that we use technology for good, right? And he started grappling with this, and I had the same experience when I started reading John Dyer on this. But he points out, when we look at technology, we can see, say, you can look at something like a mobile phone and say, like, okay, it's neutral, right? You can call your friend or you can call in a bomb threat. It can be good or bad. It depends how you use it. But actually think about, how many phone numbers do you know by memory today, right? Or how much time do we spend staring at our screens when we have computers in our pockets, right? Maybe it's morally neutral. We can make morally good decisions or morally bad decisions, but it's not effectively neutral. The technology, having this in our pockets, changes our lives, the way we organize our lives. Think about how often we don't make plans in advance because we can just contact people on the go, or we can look up directions as we go, right? It has effects on our lives, even if it might be morally neutral. It's not effectively neutral, right? Or think about the car. Somebody might say, well, it's neutral, right? You can drive to church or you can drive over somebody. There's good ways to use a car. There's bad ways to use a car, right? But actually, cars are not neutral. Think about the horse and buggies and the blacksmiths that went out of business, or the changes to our cities, to our towns. It requires new roadways, laws. It connects people in some ways. It separates people in other ways, right? Technology transforms society. So John Dyer got me thinking about this, and he alerted me to Andrew Feenberg, who holds Canada's research chair in the philosophy of technology at Simon Fraser University. And Feenberg, in developing his philosophy of technology, he says a couple things, and I just want to take a few minutes to go through some of this theory before coming back and making it practical again, because I think it's important to have a critical understanding of the technology that we're engaging in if we're going to use social media effectively rather than be used by social media effectively. So Feenberg asked two questions. He says, what do we believe about technology? Do humans control technology? And is technology value laden? So depending on how we answer these questions can determine our philosophy on technology. So he breaks it down and he says, most people think that we have control of technology and it's neutral. It doesn't have baked in values. So this kind of instrumentalism, this view that technology is just a tool. It's a tool or an instrument of the human species through which we satisfy our needs, right? It depends on how you use the tool. These are just tools. Now, other people might say, well, actually, technology just progresses on its own. This kind of determinist view that it's not really humanly controlled, but rather it controls humans. It shapes society for the requirements of efficiency and progress, or it shapes society in bad ways if it's got kind of bad baked in values. You can think of like Brave New World, or these kind of views that technology is either crafting society just to be more and more efficient, or kind of controlling us in negative ways. And I think you can see some of these views, say, in some of our circles where people are rightly concerned about many aspects of technology, and they see the negative values and the way in which it controls and shapes society. But Feenberg says we need a critical theory, right? That there is some human control. We do have choices in how we use technology. However, it's not neutral. It's value-laden. That is, it shapes us. It may be morally neutral, but it's not effectively neutral. So the way that The way that Marshall McLuhan puts this is a little more harshly. Marshall McLuhan, he famously said that, a little less politely, he says, our conventional response to all media, namely that it's how they are used that counts. McLuhan says is the numb stance of the technological idiot. Now, that really challenged me because that's how I thought about technology. But once you start to notice how technology shapes things, you can engage with it more critically so that you can be more in control, rather being aware in how it controls and shapes us. So McLuhan says the medium is the message. And I like to explain this with a couple analogies, right? Think about the difference between writing something in sand versus writing something in stone. Doesn't matter what you're writing, doesn't matter what the words are. Putting them in sand versus putting them in stone already communicates something just in the way it's communicating. The medium shapes the message in a way. Okay, that's a lot of theory, that's a lot of philosophy of technology. What about getting practical with social media again? I think we need to be able to critically engage with the platforms that we're on to understand how they shape conversation, what they are good at and what they are not good at, so that we can be wary of the dangers and take advantage of the opportunities. Think about Facebook and the like button on the comments and how easy it is for comment threads to become popularity contests. Or think about Twitter and the combination of a few features, the character limit and the retweet with comment. You have a whole genre of Twitter, like you could take double-digit percentage of posts to Twitter, and you just see somebody snarkily retweeting something that somebody else said with like their comments on why it's dumb, right? And the platforms, it's not simply just how you use it. Well, you could use it to do that, or you could not. It's what the platform encourages, right? What the platform makes easy. What are the defaults? What are the normal ways in which people use it? And are they helpful or not helpful, right? So I think we need to be, really conscious in, say, in a Facebook comment thread. Like, look, I'm not here to collect likes from somebody else. I'm not here to win some popularity contest so all the people who already agree with me gang up and vote for my post against somebody else's. I want to actually reach the person that I'm talking to. So, think about how much it sucks, how it feels when you post to a platform like Facebook, you post to Instagram, and nobody reacts to what you post, right? It feels like you're not heard, like you want that love, you want that feedback. Some of the sharpest minds in psychology are working to design these platforms to encourage us to engage more and more and encourage these behavior. We need to be conscious of what the platforms are doing, what they're encouraging, so we can ask, is the way that this social media platform shapes a conversation helpful or harmful to reaching the person and having a productive conversation about abortion? We need to have a critical theory. We need to, I think we need to reject the good, bad, neutral. We need to reject the notion that technology is bad, because although it can be used for a lot of bad things, like during the pandemic, technology, social media is being used to spread pornography and to spread the pro-life message, right? There's definitely evil out there, and technology can be used in bad ways, but I think it can be used for good, so we can't dismiss it as bad. I think if you were going to dismiss it as bad, you probably wouldn't be watching a live stream on Facebook or YouTube right now, but it needs to be said that there is good, it is worthwhile to engage. But we have to reject the simple view that it's just simply good, because it can be used for bad things. But just thinking it's neutral is not good enough. It's not just how you use it, it's how it shapes our conversations. And the more we can be conscious and reflect on that, the more we can be in control, and we can avoid some of the pitfalls and avoid some of the negative things that the social media platforms might be encouraging. So related to this, I think it's really important to kind of know the platform that you're on. It's hard to engage effectively when you're not a regular user of a platform, right? Like when I first started using Reddit more often, I didn't understand the culture and the rules, and I got myself banned from a subreddit when talking about abortion because I didn't realize that it was considered bad etiquette to be kind of cross-posting and inviting people from one forum in to the other, right? It's like when we talk to people in the streets, like you have to know the culture, right? In order to find common ground and to reach people where they're at, we have to find ways of speaking and presenting the pro-life message that are going to reach people. Like, so talking about science and human rights, using language, using terms that are going to resonate with people. Focusing on the age-based discrimination of abortion, right? You know how we do this when we try to understand the culture to reach people when we're out on the streets. We have to understand the social media culture as well. How do people use this platform? How do people normally have conversations so that I can have normal conversations about abortion, and like rather than sticking out like a sore thumb or being awkward or violating some etiquette rules that I don't understand. So I find it makes a big difference to know the platform, to be using it in your day-to-day life, so that you're a native there, so that you understand how people have conversations, so that you're having conversations in a natural way as well. And so you can avoid sticking out like a sore thumb. It's another obligatory internet meme that I'm obligated to share at this moment on my screen. You got to make sure that you know the culture and you fit in and you're a native on the platform and you know what's going on, so you're not sticking out like a sore thumb. Okay. Now, another thing to be aware of with people and platforms is the difference in having these conversations on social media. I was trying to explain it a few weeks back. It's almost like you're having a choice chain conversation, but you should pretend that while you're having that conversation with somebody in front of you, it's being live streamed on the internet as well. Dana Boyd is a technologist and communications theorist from the States, and she talks about mediated social networks. She talks about social media platforms. And she says some of the characteristics that define them include persistence. So when you post something, generally doesn't go away. Stories or Snapchat would be exceptions to this, but most posts on the internet stay there for a long time. So persistence, searchability. So other people could find things just by searching for keywords. They might not be following you. They might find you through a search. Replicability. That is, if I say something to somebody in a conversation on the street, they can relay that to somebody else. But if I say something to somebody online, they can screenshot that and copy and paste it to another platform. And the most important, I think, is the invisible audiences. And Michael Roy from our Vancouver initiative did a great job on CCBR's blog a couple weeks back, talking about being conscious about the invisible audiences. That is, you might be having a conversation with one person, but you can never know how many other people are reading that comment thread, right? There have been so many cases where I've been having an active conversation with somebody and I get private messages from other people who have never left a comment, never hit a like button or something. There's no visible indication that they're listening, but they're watching and paying attention. And those are just the people who are comfortable enough to go and send me a message, right? So you never know how many other people are listening. So that can be good and it can be bad. It can be good in the sense that your reach can be so much broader. Like even if you're having trouble reaching the person that you're talking to, if you're being a good ambassador and you're effectively communicating the pro-life message, countless other people could see, even if the person you're talking to is being illogical or is it's not grasping the other points, other people can see and can witness that. But it can also be bad in the sense that we need to be conscious of that. If we're not conscious of that, you could be having a conversation, talking one way to one person and not being aware of how, like, okay, maybe the person you're talking to doesn't have any personal experience with abortion, but somebody who's post-abortive, who's faced that trauma of abortion, might be reading that exact same conversation, right? So you have to be conscious that you're not only talking to one person at a time. You could be talking to any other group of pro-lifers or pro-choicers. It's good, but you need to be aware of it so you can do so effectively. I think about when I went to the Abortion Awareness Project in Florida way back in 2013, and I remember there was a student there, Noah, and he was really angry and really worked up and really difficult to reach. And my colleague Stephanie Gray, one of the founders of CCBR, she was having a long conversation with him and conversations throughout the day with people. And there were security guards standing by. And I remember hearing the security guards talking afterwards. I had tried to talk to one of them earlier to see what they thought about abortion. They're like, nah, man, like, we're just here to keep the peace. Like, we're not here to take sides or whatever. And after they heard Stephanie have this long, difficult conversation with someone who did not change his mind in the conversation, he was hard to reach. And I think she planted some seeds, but she didn't get all the way through to him that day. And after she had many other conversations with other people throughout the day, I remember talking to security guards and hearing them, and they were like, man, that lady's smart. Like, man, and they were talking about the arguments that she was making and how she was defending the pro-life position, how much sense it made. So that's a visible audience that sometimes happens, when you're in a crowd and you have other people within earshot of a conversation. You have no idea how many people are within earshot of your social media conversations because of the invisible audiences on social media platforms. So again, I like to think of it like you're doing a media interview. So you're talking to the journalist in front of you, but it's going to be broadcast on television. Or you're having a choice chain conversation. So you're talking to the person in front of you, but somebody's standing beside you and they're live streaming on the internet, right? It's balancing both being really attentive to the individual person that you're talking to and also being aware that you have no idea who else might be hearing it and who else might be listening to it and the ways in which you might be reaching them, right? So it's an opportunity. But I guess since I'm talking about Stephanie, I think about one of her favorite movies to quote, with great power comes great responsibility, right? We have to be aware of those invisible audiences so that we can use them, so we can leverage that to our advantage rather than have it be a liability that we're not conscious of. We have to be aware of the persistence and searchability and replicability such that this conversation we're having with somebody now could be viewable by somebody else later through a search, or could be copied and pasted to some other social media platform. Like, this person said this thing, right? We always need to be it's like a media interview in that sense, where anything we say could be taken out of context and repeated and copied somewhere else, right? So there's only so much we can do to control that. But I think being aware of that, we can take extra care to be sensitive, extra care to be kind and polite, to avoid anything that could come across as being overly harsh, to be extra conscious of being good ambassadors through our words, because we don't have our body language and our tone of voice, because you never know who else might be watching now, who else might search and stumble upon it later, or where else it might be copied and pasted, where else it might go. Just want to share a couple more thoughts on the kind of personal, on some personal considerations of engaging in these kind of conversations on social media. I'm going to share one other obligatory XKCD comic here. This one is called Duty Calls. It says, are you coming to bed? I can't. This is important. What? Someone is wrong on the internet. And for any of us who've had conversations online, you know the feeling. The subtext for this comic is, what do you want me to do? Leave? Then they'll keep being wrong. Right? And I often think of this Duty Calls comic because I think we need to be conscious of the time and energy that it can take to engage in social media conversations, not to scare us off from it, because it's critically important that we do. People are spending time on social media. The pro-life message needs to be there, especially a time like now where people are spending more time on social media than they are outside of their houses on the streets. It's important to put the time and energy in. Lives are at stake. We can change hearts and minds. It's critical to do it, but it's important to understand the time and energy that it takes so that we set aside the appropriate time, that we make sure we have the energy so that we don't burn out, have a bad experience, and then stop doing what's really important for us to do. So I find that these conversations can go one of two ways when they can take a lot of energy. The first is that they can become synchronous. That is, they can become real-time conversations. So you comment, somebody else comments. By the time you post your other comment, there's two more, and then it's just going and going and going, and everybody's having the conversation at the same time. The other way in which it can take up a lot of energy is when it becomes really drawn out at the other extreme, where you comment in the morning, go about your day, and come in the afternoon, and there's say somebody replies in the afternoon, you reply in the evening, they reply the next morning, and suddenly, step by step, over the course of a week, you're having a long conversation, maybe with 2 or 3 people on the same thread, right? So it's important to be aware of the time and energy that it can take so that we can be conscious of setting that time aside, or knowing if we don't have the time, right? Like sometimes if I know that I don't have the time for a conversation, I might leave a different kind of comment than if I'm available to put the time in. I might, ask one really important question, but leave it for other people to pick up the conversation. Or I might ask a really important question and drop, one really important link. Whereas other times I'm going to ask conversation starter questions, and I want to get a conversation going because, hey, I'm in it for the long haul. I'm going to chip in and continue this as long as it remains productive. Sometimes, say there's a large comment thread and there's 20 or 30 comments from pro-choicers. I might pick 3 or 5, somewhere in that range, and just ask a few questions, get a few conversations started. But I don't want to bite off more than I can chew, right? So be aware of the time and energy that it takes, because it's really important to be able to put our time and energy to defending the human rights for all human beings, to defending preborn human rights. And there's a critical opportunity to do that online, to reach people that we might not be able to reach as easily offline, to reach people during a time we can't reach people online, where we can't reach people offline because of the pandemic, but we can reach people online. It's critically important. It's worth our time and energy, but you have to know the time and energy that it takes so that you can pace yourself, because it's important to be able to do this for the long run, not just to have like a really long and exhausting week and then to give up because you think that it's too tiring. It's not if you pace yourself and take conversations one step at a time. So I know there's a lot of comments here, and I haven't read them all. I'm going to jump in a second. So if you have any questions, feel free to leave them, and I will get to those conversations in a moment. But just to kind of recap some of my thoughts, I've bounced around from the theoretical to the practical and tried to share different stories. You have to remember the person, and it's harder to do that online. And we need to be conscious of the platforms. They aren't neutral. We have to be conscious of the behavior that they encourage and the behavior that they discourage, so that we can critically engage and decide whether that behavior is actually helpful or harmful to having productive conversations, so that we aren't controlled by the platforms, but we can make conscious and critical decisions of, you know what, I'm not going to do the default thing because the default thing's not helpful. Or I am going to do the default thing here because I can use that to have an effective conversation. We need to understand the nature of the platforms, how they work, and be extra sensitive to people. Sensitivity over snark. Keep it short. When in doubt, err on the side of being really short. One bit of common ground, ask one question. If you're going to share links, don't get in the link wars. Think about it yourself. If somebody with an opposing view were to come onto your social media profile and drop an essay and 5 links to like peer-reviewed articles and hour-long YouTube videos, how much time would you spend on that? And how much credibility would you give their argument? Maybe if you're really passionate about it too, but it helps to keep it short. One question, or I will share links, but I try to keep it to, one link at a time if I'm going to share a link. I love sharing a link to ehd.org, or specifically to particular videos in their library. There's just stunning prenatal development video, especially if you look at the library around the 6-week mark. There's videos that explain the brain development and the heart and the movement of the limbs. So I'll drop a link to one of those videos to show the humanity of a preborn child. If you search Created Equal on Vimeo, that video, I think, most accurately captures the horror of abortion. A video was posted about 7 or 8 years ago with lots of footage of abortion victims. On Vimeo, CCBR's before and after abortion video is there too, with a mix of the prenatal and abortion victim photography. Or abortionprocedures.com videos are very helpful too. They communicate the horror of abortion, but they explain the abortion procedure at various stages throughout pregnancy. So those are my main go-tos, but I'm not going to drop them all at once. I will drop I'll try to drop one link at a time, and keep it to one question. Try to keep it short, and if I'm going to elaborate, it's going to be after I've got somebody's attention and after I'm engaging in conversation with them. Know the platform. If you're a native to the platform, if you're engaging it, if you post there about other things, you'll know how people talk and you can engage more effectively. For me and my kind of personal philosophy around social media, I find it helpful to be active in posting a variety of things on social media, because I think if I'm only posting pro-life things, then only pro-life people are going to want to pay attention. And I don't know whether or not I should be, the other side sometimes wants to paint us in the most negative light, right? They see us as just radicals beyond the pale. They'll dehumanize us after they dehumanize preborn children. They'll say that we're just like they often don't see us as human beings. A lawyer for an opposing counsel in litigation that I'm involved with right now, because a colleague of and I were assaulted while doing pro-life outreach at a Toronto University campus. The defense lawyer submitted a screenshot of the fact that I had posted to Twitter a press release of our lawsuit, because we want to shine a light on pro-choice violence, because I think the average person understands that it's wrong to engage in violence just because you have a different point of view than someone else. So we put out a press release regarding the lawsuit, and he posted a screenshot of my Twitter profile and submitted it to the court. I think trying to suggest that we're sort of like up to no good or something like that. And opposing counsel has been trying to, paint us as these kind of beyond the pale, radicals, these awful, horrible human beings. And I think it's really helpful that the screenshot of my Twitter profile included a video of me playing violin and me, talking about some technology stuff. sharing some technology articles and just being a normal human being on social media. It's a lot harder. It's a lot harder for people to kind of dismiss you, or it's more likely going to pay attention to you if you're a normal human being. I can think of another conversation I had on Reddit, where somebody was saying like, come on, man, like, you're a coward, like you're hiding behind, some fake name or whatever. And I'm like, no, this is my first initial and my last name. Like, my website's in my profile link. Like, you can find me online. Like, I'm a real person right here. Like, I just find that's helpful to be a real human being. And my philosophy is to post a variety of things on social media, and critically to include pro-life content. But if I'm not only including pro-life content, it's more likely that other people who aren't already in pro-life circles are going to pay attention to my posts and not just tune me out. So I try to have a mix of content and then choose intentionally when I'm going to engage. It's important to share, but also I can't be doing that every day, because I can't be having conversations. I can't be starting conversations every day. I can't keep up. So to make sure I have a steady stream of pro-life content, a steady but manageable stream, mixed in with other stuff on my personal platform, so that I can get the message out in my circles in a way that I can manage, and in a way that that I think can effectively reach other people. Okay, so I have been rambling a ton. I am going to start looking through the comments now and pick out some questions here. Is that spelled John Dyer? Yes, I should. Afterwards, maybe I'll drop some links into the stream for some of the people I'm referencing. But John Dyer, Clarissa asked. That's John like normal, Dyer, D-Y-E-R. I guess I have the book here. But if you search the web for his name, he's got a great blog and lots of great interesting thoughts. And I'm just skimming the surface of the critical theory of technology. Is lots of interesting thoughts from a theological perspective on technology as well too. I'm a fan. Kyle dropped the link in the comments for me. Thank you. Okay, question. What would you suggest for the situation where you're having a conversation with one person and then another person joins in and starts commenting? Would you incorporate that person right away? I would say it depends. I would say it depends on the platform. It depends on how the conversation's going, how off topic it is, how unrelated it is. It depends if the conversation can be threaded, right? So like on Twitter versus Reddit versus Facebook or Instagram, like your comment threads are very different. So I would be thinking about, is it going to be distracting to the main conversation that I'm having? Or is it going to be productive to be able to address something else? Like sometimes it's helpful. It's helpful in the sense that it increases engagement if you're now talking to two people at the same time, like the conversation is growing. As long as you still have the time and energy to manage it, as long as the other person who's engaging is engaging, like as long as there's an opportunity for productive conversation with them there, and as long as the platform's going to allow for it without it being super distracting. But like on most platforms, I'll go and I'll talk to maybe 2 or 3 people at the same time, just tagging them in the comment replies, so that I just have a separate comment for each person, right? So if I'm talking to person A and person B comes in, I'll reply to person A, tag them, but then I'll leave another comment, reply to person B. So I'm using separate comments. You can see this comment is reply to this person, this comment's a reply to that person. And I find that's not a confusing way to follow, especially if you're not writing essays, especially if you're keeping it short. I think you can have productive conversations with a few people there. But on the other hand, if somebody's coming in and they're just being a troll, they're not being unhelpful, like they're just being a jerk, or they're just coming in to just like drop gotcha things, then I'm going to stick with the one person who I'm engaging with in a meaningful way and just focus on having a meaningful conversation and ignore the trolls. And that goes for pro-lifers and pro-choicers both. Like if there's a pro-lifer who's coming in an unhelpful way, I might ignore, or I might engage with either unhelpful pro-lifers and pro-choicers briefly and just say, hey, cut it out. Like, I think we're having a productive conversation here. Like, I know I disagree with person A, but like, I think we can be respectful. You know, like so sometimes I might just leave a short comment to like sideline somebody who's being unhelpful and then keep the conversation focused. But I guess the big question for me is it productive? Is it going to be productive? And I think it can be to talk to more than one person at once, but depends on what the people are asking and if the platform is going to allow for it. Olivia asks, do you present the human rights argument one question at a time as well? So that's a good question. So for people who aren't familiar, human rights argument is a series of questions, right? Do you believe in human rights? Most people are going to say yes. Okay, well, who should get human rights? People are going to say humans or everyone. And we'll ask, if two humans reproduce, what species is their offspring? And they'll often say, well, human. It's like, okay, so if humans reproduce humans and human rights are for all humans, not just some of us, then doesn't it logically follow that abortion, point to your photo, doing this to an innocent human being, is a human rights violation? So we can't exactly communicate it like that online. We don't. I don't think it fits the same format. I often break it up or communicate it in summary. So I will often ask, "Do you believe in human rights?" as a separate question, and use that to start, and then follow up with more of the human rights argument later. Or I'll ask, put whatever a bit more of the argument into the question. I'll say like, do you believe that human rights are for all human beings or just some of us? Right? That gets some of the equality into the question in a concise way. Or I'll ask that question, I'll let them reply. And then, you know, when I reply, maybe I'll pull out a different part of the human rights argument, but while summarizing, I'll say like, well, I agree human rights are for everyone. You know, so don't you think that human rights should start when the human being starts? Like, when do you think that biology would tell us that human life begins? I guess I think of the human rights argument as like, these are the things I want to communicate. Human rights are for all human beings. And we know from science that life begins at fertilization. So I might often ask those as separate questions. Do you believe in human rights? And I'll leave that at the end of a comment. When do you think that science or biology tells us that life begins? And I'll leave that at the end of a comment. I'll let them think about it. I'll let them follow up. And then I'll come back in response to their reply, respond to what they said, but, you know, bring in more of the, well, this is what science says about it, or this is why it's an injustice to deny some human beings their human rights. But I'll break it down into separate pieces, but it's not the exact same as the way I do it in dialogue. But I'm trying to break up questions about human rights, questions about science, and then put them together in summary form in a couple sentences, and usually over the course of a couple comments. John Peter asks, how do you deal with attacks on your person as a response to your replies? Do you typically address this or ignore it and just continue answering exclusively about the issue at hand? If you want to see some attacks on my person, check out the Instagram account promoting this live stream, because there's about 3 people active in there, throwing a lot of attacks out on me personally. So you can see in practice how I prefer to handle those. And that's mostly by ignoring them and focusing on the substance. Occasionally, if something's really bad and really personal, I will try to respond by showing love and expressing peace to someone else, like I did with that guy on the chess website. You know, just to be like I have to think about what my friend Matthew said doing while we were doing activism at Ryerson once, and a student who's obviously hurting, who engaged in misconduct that she was sanctioned for by the university. She was grabbing at the camera and doing things, and she said something like, you know, I want to tear you guys apart. And Matthew just responded to her. He just said, you know, I would never say anything like that about you. And I thought it was just really powerful. It was just really honest and a really powerful way of just being like, I wish you no harm. So sometimes I feel the need to say that if somebody's getting really nasty, because sometimes they're getting nasty and they're lashing out. It's like they're being defensive, right? They're lashing out because they feel like they're under attack, or they're hurting, so they want to hurt you. And often I'll just ignore them, but if it gets really bad, I'll like I might be like, yikes, like, hey, I was just trying to say this, or like, hey, I wish you no harm, and I would never say anything like that about you. You know, I'm just trying to ask a question here, you know, but like, I think we can disagree, and like, you know, I'm trying to understand where you're coming from. Sometimes if somebody's being nasty, they'll just kind of like be nastier about that. So, oftentimes my default move is just to focus on the issue at hand. Like, I see like blah blah blah, personal attack, personal attack, personal attack, something wrong about science. Okay, let's ask a question about science and just ignore the personal attack. I'm not going to reciprocate. I'm just going to continue having a productive conversation. But sometimes I'll address it just to say like, I wish you no harm, kind of thing. Clarissa asks, any thoughts on how to re-engage somebody post-conversation? That's a good question. I think it depends. So she's, I guess you can see it on the screen, you know, how you can re-engage where you make some progress, but then you stop talking about it, you move on to something else. I mean, maybe it's an opportunity in a future post if they comment again. Sometimes it could be like a personal message. It could be, and like, maybe you have an excuse for it, like a reason or a question. It could be like, hey, I know we had this conversation like a couple months back and we haven't really talked about it, but like I stumbled across this article and I'm really curious what you think about this. And it's a way to kind of start a conversation from kind of like honestly asking what you think. Kind of depends on the relationship you have with somebody, but you know, being able to reach out to someone directly with a particular question that pertains to where you left off or what you learned about their perspective could be a helpful way to kind of re-engage and bring the topic up again if it doesn't come up naturally from another post. Elissa asks, how do you have a heart conversation online? It's really tough because you don't have tone of voice and you don't have body language. So I think it's taking extra care to make explicit, to put into words what you might be feeling. For those of you that have been paying attention to CCBR social media for a while, 2 summers ago, there was a restaurant owner in Toronto who just was screaming and going nuts in response to some of our volunteer activists and some of our staff on the streets in a video that went viral. She was just incredibly angry and was just verbally abusing people in the street who were, you know, who were leaving her alone. I had the opportunity to talk with her on Twitter last year, where she was getting really angry about CCBR again. She had a lot of misconceptions. Like, she had the false understanding that we were out to get her in some way. And I just took extra time to engage with her and explain, like, look, I think what you did is wrong. I think we can have a civil conversation. Like, you know, I think your behavior is embarrassing. But I don't wish you any harm, and nobody at CCBR wishes you any harm. Like, I wish you wouldn't do that. Probably like you wish we wouldn't share the truth about abortion. But I don't have any ill will against you. And, you know, the nasty things that people have been saying to you online, I think that's awful. And I'm sorry that they said that to you. I'm sorry that you did what you did, but that doesn't excuse other people being cruel to you. And I just went out of my way to say it. And I remember after engaging with her for like a good solid hour, over a couple hundred messages on Twitter, there was someone else in the conversation who jumped in and started attacking me. And she actually came to my defense. She says, she's like, well, you know, if I'm understanding him correctly, you know, there's no need to call him names. You know, don't call him a prick. You might be able to say that his actions are prickish, but don't call him a prick. And she got the point I was trying to make, that like, look, I'm criticizing actions, but like, I don't have any ill will against her as a person. I think it just takes extra work. Like, it's hard to listen. It's hard to create the space for someone to open up about something personal on social media in the way that, like strangers are more likely to like, I'm surprised at the way that people open up about personal things when we're talking on the sidewalks, because in some ways it's like they're talking to someone they might not ever see again and nobody else is listening, right? But when you're talking online, you've got that persistence, the invisible audiences. Like people are way less likely to be personal and to open up. But I you know, I guess I'll go out of my way to say part of my objective, you know, like, hey, I think it's important to show the truth, to save children's lives, and to spare women the trauma from abortion, right? I want to communicate that I'm not here to judge or condemn, that I'm concerned about the traumatic impact that the death experience of abortion has on women and men as well. Because when you're involved in complicit in killing children, that leaves an impact and that wounds people as well. So to be explicit about saying that, sharing how I really feel in a kind way, going out of my way to be polite, to compliment somebody where I can, that's the best that I can do to try and practice hard apologetics. It's harder to kind of create the space for things. I haven't had a lot of luck with like a conversation going into DMs, but sometimes that works too. If somebody prefers to have a conversation in private, you could always offer that too. All right. I am taking a long time responding to some of these questions. I want to get through more. I have a little bit more time here, but I'm going to try and keep my answers quicker so I can get through more of the questions. Michael asks, when do you quit a conversation? I'll often be replying back and forth for a long time. It seems it's going nowhere. It feels like a waste of my time. Would you recommend continuing however long it takes to naturally end? Not necessarily. I think you have to use your judgment and discernment in the same way you would on the streets. You know, you're not necessarily going to stay there for 2 hours if you don't have 2 hours, but sometimes you totally will stay there for 2 hours. You know, if you're online, like sometimes I will continue a conversation for days and days, and other times I'm out of time. I'm too busy over the next couple of days to keep up with it, or it doesn't seem like it's productive engaging in this person anymore. And you could always kind of wrap it up. You can always kind of say like, hey, I'm sorry, but this is going to be my last comment. You know, I unfortunately I don't have the time to keep up with this conversation anymore. But I have enjoyed talking with you. I just want to leave you with one last thought or something like that, and kind of like frame a kind of conclusion, so that when like, I don't know, sometimes it makes me feel better when I'm leaving a conversation. It's not like I'm abandoning it because I'm defeated or I don't know how to respond to something, like forever who's reading it or might think that. It's like, hey, I'm out of time now, but I'm just going to leave you with this. And that's the last thing that other people could see or read. Like, I think it's totally reasonable to wrap it up that way, but use your judgment on how much time and energy you have, how productive the conversation is, and whether you have the chance to get further, or whether your time might be better spent somewhere else. Teresa says, what do you do when people don't trust the information you give them? There are a lot of people out there who believe all pro-life evidence is faked. I think it's a really good question, because so many internet debates are just like link wars between people sharing one conspiracy theory and another. And well, if only you watched this hour-long YouTube video, then you would know this is really the truth. And it's like, okay, well, if I respond with an hour-long YouTube video or some academic paper, that's not going to change anyone's mind anyways. I guess I try to be Socratic as much as possible, just to ask good questions. I try to go to neutral sources of information as much as possible. So some like Wikipedia, or to just simply say, like, you know, if you look at any biology textbook from grade school to grad school, like pick your favorite, it'll tell you that fertilization is the beginning of a new individual human being. You know, to like, if you're familiar with our apologetics and before, at, after fertilization, that's a Socratic way in which we try to communicate the scientific truth that life begins at fertilization. You know, sometimes I will post a link to more solid information, but like I think you need to build up a trust with somebody first. Like, I'm not going to jump in and talk to a stranger and be like, here's a link to this thing that you should read, because they don't trust me, they don't know me yet. But if I'm honestly engaging with somebody and they honestly want to know why I believe what I believe or how I could defend this, and there's a link that could help, then I might be more likely to share it. But I find it's more effective to ask good questions, or appeal to video evidence, like say to communicate the science and when life begins. Like if somebody's saying, the child's not alive until 24 weeks or something like that, and you can share a video of a kid moving around in the womb at 5 or 6 weeks. That's like from ehd.org, that's National Geographic distributed video evidence. It's not just, somebody's blog. So I try to stick to information that is more readily available, like photos or things like that, or Socratic questions to communicate the truths that I know, because people aren't going to do a ton of reading, and if you haven't built some trust with them yet, they're not going to trust the links that you share. Any strategies for controlling yourself during an online conversation, keeping yourself up, responding while worked up? I think about that XKCD internet argument comic again. Take a deep breath, remember the person, maybe click through to their profile sometimes. You can see how some people are hurting. Sometimes you can see that there might be other things going on that are leading somebody to lash out to you. I just try to remember, like, the nastier somebody is being, like, the more they're trying to hurt you, the more they're probably hurting. But yeah, it's just remember the person, or like Clarissa says, tune out if your blood pressure is worked up and stuff. Like, don't comment when you're really angry and worked up like that. Like, take a walk, do something else, come back when you've had a chance to process, or like go rant offline. Be like, I can't believe somebody said this. How could you believe that? That's ridiculous. Get the rant out before you put your hands back on the keyboard. That's maybe another good strategy. So you can get that off your chest still, whatever frustration you may be feeling, so that the frustration's gone, or at least lessened, before you actually type a response. What other questions can I answer? So Mr. Sir Dude asks on YouTube about how one would bring the pro-life message to Canadian politics. So I focused mostly on education. Like, our focus at CCBR is on educating the culture. I would recommend checking out weneedalaw.ca and itstartsrightnow.ca for a couple solid pro-life political organizations. If I'm getting in a political conversation, I might use different talking points. Like, for example, when we're trying to make the case for human rights for all human beings, we're talking science, human rights, the human rights argument. But if you're talking about like a particular political context, like say like something like a late-term abortion ban, I might be using different talking points, like from weneedalaw.ca, just about like, look, Canada's the only country with no abortion laws. Every other country has some kind of protections. Point is, there might be different talking points that could be useful, because politics is the art of the possible. When we're engaging in changing the culture, we're trying to get people all the way to the pro-life position. But when you're engaging in politics, I think it's more focused on the next step and on what is possible and on incremental gains. So I would turn to We Need a Law and Right Now as two good organizations, and kind of see some of the stuff that they're doing on social media. It also depends who your target audience is, right? Like, are you trying to get other people from the same political party as you to support candidates that are good on pro-life policy, or you try to engage people on the opposite side of the political spectrum? That might be more just general apologetics. So political conversations are a little different, but I point you in that direction for a little more help on that, I guess. Art asks, what do you do when someone is so vindictive and abusive that you're at a loss how to engage productively? I mean, I guess I would say I don't give up I don't want to give up too soon. I want to try and engage, just ignore the nasty stuff and just, ask some simple questions like, do you believe in human rights? Like, do you think human rights should be for all human beings or just some human beings? Or like, hey, I get that you don't like me. I get that you're not, a fan of me. Can I ask you a question though? Like, I'm just trying to understand where you're coming from. Like things that can kind of try to encourage people to be more civil. But if somebody's truly uncivil and they have no interest in a civil conversation, then I would just kind of leave it on display for everyone else to see. I would kind of leave a final comment, just be like, hey, like, sorry, I'm happy to have a conversation with you, even though we disagree. I would love to know what you really think about this. I've asked you if you think that human rights should be for all human beings or just some human beings. I've asked you when you think science would tell us that life begins. It doesn't seem that you're interested in talking to me. It seems like you don't like me very much. I have no ill will against you. I wish you no harm. Peace. Sometimes I'll do that and I'll just leave it. And then that's what the invisible audience can see too. Somebody who's pro-choice being nasty and ignoring the basic questions, and someone who's pro-life being polite, asking some simple questions and wishing someone well. So there's a certain point in which it's not worth it anymore. Katie asks, what are your thoughts on sharing AVP on social media and conversation? I think it's essential to communicate the truth about abortion. It's just more challenging on how to do it because somebody's got to actually click on the link or whatever, right? And you don't want to make it like an AVP Rickroll kind of thing where you're tricking people into seeing AVP. But I'm always thinking about like, this is missing from the conversation, right? Like if we were having a conversation offline and there wasn't photo evidence of the humanity of the preborn child and the inhumanity of abortion, we would have a problem with that. Like we would see it as really ineffective, really inefficient. And we'd, some strategy training would be in order. So in social media, I think the question is, okay, well, how do we bring the visual evidence in? That's where I like the Created Equal video as a go-to on Vimeo. I like CCBR's abortion before and after video as a go-to on Vimeo. I like abortionprocedures.com as a go-to, but I find I need to get some trust or some kind of rapport before somebody's going to click a link and actually watch a video like this. Or if it's invisible audiences, I might be leaving it for someone else to see, but I might, leave a comment and say like, I understand those circumstances are really difficult, trot up the toddler. How could that ever justify, like, if it's not justified for a born child, how could it be justified for a child just a few months earlier? Or like how could it ever justify doing this to another human being? Link to an abortion video, maybe in brackets, like this shows video footage from abortions. Like I want to drop those links in there, even if the person I'm talking to isn't going to click on them. Other people might. I don't want to do it like right away, like I'm a bot, because that's going to stop people to engage. But it'd be like, for those who've done activism, if you're having conversation where you're away from the photos, but you have a choice card in your wallet, it's like, how would you bring it up in conversation? It's not going to be like the first thing you say, just like, boom, here's a card. You're going to actually engage in somebody in conversation, but you're going to look for the first earliest reasonable opportunity to ground that conversation in the reality of what abortion does, that it decapitates, dismembers, and disembowels an innocent human being. So I look for the earliest opportunities to reasonably and naturally bring the visual evidence into a conversation. It also depends on what the post is, right? Like CCBR has been posting abortion victim photography to social media. That helps because you have the AVP in the post. But if there is an AVP there already, I'm looking for the earliest opportunity to bring that in. Michael Connell asks if I always engage with your own name on every platform. And I did answer some of that. So personally, I have a very active online presence that isn't anonymous, and I have for a good 15 years. So I'm like, my strategy is I'm not afraid to talk about abortion, and I'm not afraid to tell people that I'm pro-life and I engage in pro-life activism, because I'm also talking about all the other things that I'm doing too. I think like I've never felt the need to go anonymous. I think that on some platforms, like on Reddit, anonymity is more of a norm, whereas on Facebook, it's against the terms of service. So if you're somewhere like Twitter or Reddit, and you have reason to be anonymous, there's good reasons that some people might want to remain anonymous. I don't think that's a problem. Because I don't personally feel a reason to be anonymous, I will use my identity as a way to humanize myself and try to show that I'm a real person and a real human being. But sometimes people could have good reasons for being anonymous on certain platforms where that's more commonplace. Amy just asked, you missed the beginning of the talk. We'll be able to watch it later. Yes, you can replay the whole live streams on Facebook or YouTube. You can replay it from the beginning. Which other people have already answered. Cindy asks, how can we make the most of finding ourselves in a closed pro-abortion group online without getting kicked out? I don't know. If it's a closed group that's a pro-abortion group, I don't think that's a place where you're going to be able to effectively engage in apologetics, because you'll just be booted. And I don't think it would be honest or useful to try and like ask questions or challenge things, because like if you're going to meaningfully challenge them, then you'd probably get kicked out. I find that a group like that could just be a good way to learn, maybe get some perspective, try and understand how those from how abortion advocates are thinking about the issue, so that we can be better equipped in other places to engage with them and know some of the like false assumptions or misconceptions or inaccurate information that they have, or like I would just kind of take that as a learning opportunity to be part of the invisible audience. If it's really the kind of group where it's closed to pro-lifers, you're just going to get kicked out if you try and engage in apologetics there. But you can learn more about the perspective of abortion advocates that can make you a better advocate for preborn human rights. Okay, we just have a couple more. Olivia asks, what do you think about jumping in on conversation that other pro-lifers not handling particularly graciously? If you're being gentle there, and if by not particularly graciously you mean like really, really horribly, I'd be all over stealing that conversation from them. Like if somebody's being mean or cruel, or even if somebody's just being really bad with their apologetics, or they're like writing essays, or they're like giving like delivering a philosophical treatise on Kant and the categorical imperative to somebody who's obviously hurting from an abortion, yeah, I would cut in. I'd try and take the conversation. I like if it's a pro-lifer who's being mean or cruel, I might explicitly tell them to knock it off and be like, hey, I don't think that's necessary. I think she raises a good point, and I'd just like to ask, but I would love to know what she would say about this, though, and ask a question. Build some common ground and say we don't have to be mean. Let's build common ground. If it's somebody who's just being really ineffective, I'd still jump in, but I ignore the ineffective pro-lifer, focus on the pro-choicer, and just try to model more effective apologetics and hope that the pro-lifer will learn. If you can show you're having a more effective conversation in a different way, then maybe they will follow suit. But if somebody's like doing a half decent job, but you just think you could do better, then I would back off. If somebody like knows what they're doing, even if they're still learning or there's some things that are hit or miss, let them have the conversation, because it's more effective, whatever relationship they're starting to build with the person they're talking to, than constantly having another stranger cut in. So I would cut in if somebody's being like really ineffective or mean, then I would definitely cut in. If somebody's just doing like a mediocre job, but they're doing the right things, then let them carry the conversation on and let them get better. And if you know them, maybe like send them a private message with some suggestions or something. But I wouldn't cut in if somebody's doing a half decent job. Deanna asks, when engaging with politicians, it's very important to be respectful. You won't be responded to. Well, that wasn't an ask. That was a comment. That's a comment worth highlighting, though, on the question about engaging with politicians and politics. Yeah. Again, I've been focused on engaging with pro-choicers, but if you're engaging with politicians on social media, super important, right? Like, it's easy to be mean to people there too. And pro-lifers, and unfortunately sometimes pro-life organizations, are too often harsh and nasty and engage in friendly fire to people who could be allies. And they just go on the attack. And I think it's important not to attack our allies or our potential allies, but to be polite and respectful. And that's a whole different thing. It's not apologetics. It's not what we're talking to pro-choicers, but if you want to reach the person, if you want to reach politicians or people in the political arm of the movement who could be allies, you got to remember the person too. Don't attack, especially don't engage in friendly fire. Build common ground. We can't forget common ground just because we're talking within our own community. It's still incredibly important to be sensitive and respectful while asking the right questions and challenging people to stand up for the truth and have the courage to do so. All right, I'll take one last question, which is from Alyssa here. Do you engage in pro-choice posts only, or only respond to pro-choice comments on pro-life posts? I kind of do a bit of all of the above. So for me personally, just in terms of where I have time and where I spend time on social media and whatever platforms I use or resent or love, I do a few things. Like, I will post to my own social media accounts sometimes, and I will do so regularly but selectively. Like, I don't want to do it every day and, like, as I said earlier, and annoy people. But important things I will get through. I'll make sure there's some regular posts. So I'll be ready to engage in my circles there. Sometimes some platforms will allow, like Facebook, you can use friend lists to post with more privacy settings. So I have like a pro-life friend list. So I'll use that friend list if I want to post for internal conversation. Like, I don't want to have a debate right now. I want to talk to other pro-lifers about something that's going on in the pro-life community, versus if I post to all my friends or post publicly, then I'm willing to engage with my pro-choice friends and family. Sometimes I will jump on pro-life posts and respond to pro-choice comments, like on CCBR's Instagram or Facebook page or things like that. That's a different kind of conversation, because sometimes you have some of the most passionate pro-choicers there. But people could be coming through from hashtags. Like, you never know who you might reach, but you're sometimes engaging with some of the people that are harder to reach. But it's still good practice for conversation. You still could reach people, and there's still the invisible audience. So if you're looking to practice and find someone who's already interested in having a conversation about abortion, check out CCBR social media profiles. Look at some of the recent posts where there are comments from pro-choicers. Find one that somebody else hasn't engaged in, or keep an eye out for new posts and try asking one of them, do you believe in human rights? See where it goes from there. Like, you can engage that way. The other thing that I do in terms of looking for pro-choice posts, I have a few searches, like Google alerts or Twitter saved searches, where I'll keep an eye out for commentary, for chatter on social media about Toronto against abortion activism. So when people post about CCBR internship activism on Reddit, or they post about Toronto against abortion activism at the University of Toronto, I have a good way of kind of picking up some of those posts in my search. So, like, on Reddit, a lot of what I've done is I've responded to posts in the Toronto or the U of T or the Ryerson subreddits, which may be from pro-choicers talking about pro-life activism, and correct some misinformation or engage people with apologetics in there. So sometimes I'm looking for places where pro-choicers are talking, so that I can engage and bring the pro-life message respectfully into that conversation and correct some inaccurate information there. So a bit of a mix of all of the above. I guess it kind of depends on the platform, the nature of the platform, and how the conversation's happening and where you're going to find them. But if you want to get started engaging and getting more practice at putting your apologetics into practice in social media, check out CCBR social media platforms. Our social media team has been doing just an incredible job over the last several weeks, especially with the pandemic, at increasing our posts and our reach on Facebook, on Instagram, on TikTok. CCBR is on Twitter as well. Take a look at CCBR's posts on those platforms, and especially the ones where there's a lot of pro-choicers engaging in the comments. Dive in, help us out, respond to some of the comments, put the apologetics in practice, keep it short, keep it concise, be sensitive rather than snarky, remember the person, remember what the platforms, how they're shaping our conversations, what they're encouraging or discouraging, so that we can make sure that we're doing the right things, even if the platforms encourage the wrong things, and give it a try, because it's more important now than ever to engage in conversations on social media, because this is one of the only places we can reach people in conversations right now. And abortion is not canceled, but neither is pro-life outreach. Now is the time to give it a shot. And I'd love to know what you think, because these are thoughts that have been evolving for me over the last 10, 15 years of engaging in conversations on a variety of issues online. And I'd love to hear from you or your experience as well. So you can always reach out to me on social media. You can find me on all the various platforms, or most of them as well. And I'd love to hear if you have any other questions, or from your experiences, your successes, or your failures or challenges, let me know. And I'd love to talk further about it. And I think we'll call it here. Thanks everybody for tuning in to this live stream. And I guess I should mention, keep an eye on CCBR social media, because we're going to be doing have more signups for some of the webinars that we're doing with some additional trainings. And we've got a live stream coming up on Friday for the Toronto March for Life as well on Friday evening. So keep an eye out for those things, and hopefully I'll see you at a future webinar or live stream. Thanks for tuning in.